Kids, here we go. I just think it's important we know this battle after thinking about it. You know, I try to continue to give you a good education, and this is an important battle, I think. So, remember we talked about that we were going to make an effort as part of the three-pronged strategy against the Japanese to go back and reacquire the Solomon Islands. Okay? Well, the Battle of Guadalcanal was a battle in the Solomon Islands when we went back to try to gain control of those, because we wanted to be able to have good communication lines to Australia. And that's the reason why we went back and got the Solomon Islands, because the Japanese first took the Solomon Islands to cut Australia off from the Allies. So the Battle of Guadalcanal was a battle in the Solomon Islands, and it was the first major offensive in this time period when we went back. Yeah.
Guadalcanal is one word.
It is one word. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, this turned out to be a decisive victories for the Allies in the Pacific theater. And what happened is United States Marines launched a surprise attack in August of 1942. August of 1942, United States Marines launched a surprise attack of Guadalcanal, which was one of the islands in the Solomon Islands. And the reason that we were interested in Guadalcanal is we wanted to take control of an air base that they had there that was under construction. In other words, the Japanese were constructing this air base, and we wanted control of that so we would have good lines of communication with Australia. And so the goal was to take Guadalcanal. So in August of 1942, the United States Marine Corps launched a surprise attack in August, and they ended up taking control of an air base there that was under construction. Now, both sides suffered heavy losses in this particular battle. Both sides suffered heavy losses. But the Japanese suffered so many more casualties that they withdrew in February of 1943. So both sides suffered heavy losses during the Battle of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. However, the Japanese suffered far greater casualties, and as a result of the casualties they accumulated in this battle, they withdrew from Guadalcanal in February of 1943, which gave us full control of that air base that was under construction. Now, again, the possession of Guadalcanal, this air base, would allow us to control sea lines of communication. What we mean by that is the ability to communicate by sea with Australia. And so it was a very crucial area to control. And this battle wasn't only fought on land. It wasn't only Marines. It was fought on the ground by the American Marines. It was fought in sea. We had sea battles, battles between ships, and also was fought in the air with airplanes. So it was a major league battle that actually took 6 months to win for this one particular island. Now, the reason I think it's so important is that on a sad note for the United States, on November 13th, 1942, on November 14th, 1942, a ship called the USS Juno was severely damaged in a battle. Okay? On November 13th, 1942, the USS Juno was severely damaged in one of these sea battles at Guadalcanal. So what did it do when it was damaged? It did what? What would you think? Well, it headed for port to get repaired. Well, while it was sort of retreating to go back to get repaired, it was hit by a Japanese submarine, a torpedo, and sunk. Okay? So during its retreat for repairs, the ship was actually struck by a Japanese torpedo from a submarine and sunk. So the USS Juno was severely damaged in the Battle of Guadalcanal on November 13, 1942, as it headed to port, so to speak. It was struck by a Japanese torpedo from a submarine and sunk. Now, at the time, the crew of this ship was 820. That's how many men were on the USS Juno. And of those 820, during the initial impact of that torpedo, 115 were killed and basically sunk to the bottom of the sea. 115 out of 820 were estimated to be killed instantly and basically ended up. What's that? 115 out of 820 were killed on impact and ended up in the bottom of the sea. Where did the other 705 end up, Blaine? They're swimming in the water. Very good. Now, of those 705 sailors that were left in the water, and they were there for 8 days in the water, guess how many survived? 10. 10 survived is all out of the 705 remaining. What'd they die of? What? Height? Well, you're get exposure could be called exposure. Okay, that was one thing they died from, exposure. They also died from dehydration. Hard to believe that when you're in water, but when it's salt water, it doesn't do you a lot of good. And somebody said it over here. Sharks. Sharks killed the others. So 705 sailors in the water. For the next 8 days, only 10 of those survived. The rest died from shark attack, dehydration, or exposure. Now here's the sad thing about it. On that ship, among the casualties were the Sullivan brothers. Sullivan brothers. They were among the casualties, and they were the sons of Thomas and Aaliyah Sullivan. Not that important. I mean, that I think you should know. Thomas and Aaliyah, that's an L, sorry. Aaliyah Sullivan. And they lost their sons that day. Here's who they lost. George Sullivan, age 27. A-L-L-E-L-A. Okay, Thomas and Aaliyah Sullivan. Lost their sons on the USS Juno. They lost George, age 27. And Francis, or Frank, age 26. They lost George, age 27. And Francis, better known as Frank, at age 26. And Joseph, better known as Joe, age 24. And Joseph, better known as Joe, who was 24. And Madison, better known as Matt, who was 23. Madison, just like Madison. Well, it's a boy's name. M-A-D-I-S-O-N. Madison, better known as Matt, who was 23. George, age 27. Francis, better known as Frank, age 26. Joseph, better known as Joe, age 24. Madison, better known as Matt, age 23. And Albert, better known as Al, age 20. All 5 brothers.
Wait, how old is Wilson?
20.
Were those their only kids?
All 5 brothers.
So they lost
Yep.
all of their children.
Now, why in the world were all 5 brothers on that ship? Because at that time they didn't want to be separated. They were close. They insisted. They chose to serve together on the USS Juno. All 5 killed. Which led to their historic story led to the basis of what fictional movie? Saving Private Ryan. Okay, because remember they were going after Private Ryan because his brothers had already been killed. But that's quite a story. Can you imagine the commitment that Thomas and Aaliyah Sullivan gave to World War II? Lost all 5 sons, ages 27 to 20, in one fall swoop, so to speak, at the Battle of Guadalcanal. That's why I think that story is important, so I wanted to throw that at you. Okay, we'll go to the end of your notes then, and we'll talk about the costs of World War II. Because we finished her up yesterday with the Japanese surrender on the decks of the USS Missouri. DJ Day. The costs of World War II. Costs of World War II. Do you remember how much we said that World War II cost us to fight? I'm talking about just the United States. Right now I'm talking about the United States. We'll get to the Allies in a minute and the Axis. But anybody remember what we spent on World War II? $400 billion. $400 billion was what was spent. And we financed that, as you had stated very well in your test, partially taxes, but most war or liberty bonds, okay? Remember, the 3 flag raisers that survived, that were brought home, raised $26 billion. Just during that 7, I don't know if you caught that, out of 7 Liberty Bond drive. They had 7 drives. Okay, that last one, $26 billion. How about the cost of casualties? 292,131. 292,131 American soldiers were killed in action in World War II. 292,131 American GIs killed in action in World War II. American soldiers wounded during the conflict, 671,801. 671,801 American soldiers were wounded. And our last category would have to be what? Missing in action, 139,709. 139,709. So recapping American casualties, 292,131 American soldiers killed in action in World War II, 671,801 American soldiers were wounded, and 139,709 were listed as missing in action. Now, if you think those statistics were staggering, let me tell you about the Allied losses. This would be losses outside of what I just told you. Okay, Allied losses. This would be the good guys. Now, the 3 categories I told you, killed in action, died of wounds suffered in action, wounded or missing in action, the number of casualties among the Allies, 14,141,544. So the casualties among the members of the Allied powers, they were either killed in action, died of wounds suffered in action, were wounded or missing, 14,141,544. That's the Allied powers. Okay? Now, how about the Axis powers? You would think maybe they would suffer more casualties. They actually suffered about 1/3 of casualties that the Allies did. The casualties among the members of the Axis powers, which were either killed in action, died of wounds suffered in action, wounded or missing in action, 5,634,232. 5,634,232. Yep.
So on that Allied count, does that include like everyone who went to a concentration camp in Germany?
I would say no, that these casualties would be fighting men. Fighting men, not the Jews, you mean? You mean
Yeah,
Jews? No, it doesn't include civilians.
Because you said there was 6 million Jews and then another 6 million on top of that.
Yeah, so no, those would be casualties, civilian casualties. Now, think about that when you think about the deaths. We wiped out generations of people. It's just like Fred Franson was telling me that if his father would have been sent to mainland Japan, he more than likely would have been one of the million soldiers that they estimated would have been killed, which would have meant no Fred Franson, no Logan Franson, I mean all the way down the line, no grandchildren, whatever. You know what I mean? That's a generation. Can you imagine the generations in this world that were devastated by the cost of loss of life, etc. in World War II? Incredible. And I'm not at all demeaning the Vietnam Wall or the loss of life in Vietnam, but you again have a wall that you'll see in Washington that has names about this big. Well, you can see one etched over there on the wall, 58,000, and the wall is an impressive sight. It seems like it goes forever. Can you imagine 292,131 on a wall? How big that wall is. The difference between them, I think, is that there was so much controversy and protest over the Vietnam Wall, there was more of an urge to honor those soldiers that were treated so poorly in Vietnam when they returned home. Okay, these fellas were considered heroes. Vietnam veterans were considered baby killers. We'll get into that. All kinds of negative connotations because of the war we fought in and the protesting. Was there a protest in World War II? Nobody protested. Everybody was fully behind. Okay, we'll end with that right now, and then I want to ask your opinion on a couple of things here, and we'll move from there.